It is one of the most disturbing cases we have seen. An 11-year-old girl gives birth to a baby. What that 11-year-old stepdad did is horrific, and now we know the price that he will pay. The local DA says it is perhaps the worst case of child abuse she has ever prosecuted, and you will see why. The 11-year-old stepdad, Dustin Walker, is not the only person facing charges in this terrible case. We'll talk about what his sentence, what his punishment will mean for the cases against his wife and her mother. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. This is one of those stories like I have thought about a lot over time, just with each and every update. And it's one where you just wonder how it could happen, because it is just so horrific and disturbing when we lay out these details. And it's really hard to know, what does justice actually look like in a case like this? What can a punishment actually accomplish? It's hard to say. It's the type of story that really does bring out every negative emotion that you may have. It's disturbing, it is horrific, and it is one that will have a lifetime of impact on a lot of people. I want to show you this video here. This is Dustin Walker, 35 years old, in court yesterday for his sentencing in Oklahoma, Muskogee, Oklahoma. In 2025, his 11-year-old stepdaughter gave birth to a child inside of a home in Muskogee, this rural town in Oklahoma, inside a home that did not have running water or air conditioning. The girl allegedly gave birth in the height of summer. It was August. And that girl, for more than a year, the entire pregnancy, did not see a doctor until she went to the hospital in August of last year. Now, the girl also was not the only child inside that home, living in those filthy conditions. A total of 6 kids lived in that house. And we'll talk more about them in just a moment. Now, Dustin Walker pleaded guilty to the charges that he faced in court, and this week a judge sentenced him. His attorney told local media that his client was remorseful, and Walker actually reportedly spoke to the court and apologized for the people he has hurt. Now, cameras aren't allowed in Oklahoma courtrooms, so we're going off of local media reports. KJRH television was there. Now, I'm going to tell you the impact that his alleged apology had on his sentence in just a moment, but to truly understand just how terrible this case is, I need to go back to the beginning. This story first came to light in August of last year. It was August 16th, and it was inside this home in Muskogee, Oklahoma, which is about an hour away from Tulsa, where, according to KWTW, who spoke to the district attorney who was prosecuting this case, inside that home, an 11-year-old girl gave birth to a full-term baby.
Authorities say the 11-year-old victim had not seen a doctor in more than a year. So you just think of this young girl having to go through an entire pregnancy out of the sight of medical professionals, and she was not with medical professionals when she gave birth to that child. The girl was reportedly not enrolled in school. She was out of sight for anyone who had any sort of authority. When law enforcement realized, though, what had happened, and they were trying to piece together how it could happen, they spoke to the girl's parents, her mom, Cherie Walker, and then you have the stepdad, who we're talking about today, Dustin Walker. And initially, the Walkers acted reportedly shocked to learn that the girl had gave birth. They said they had no idea that this 11-year-old was pregnant.
Now, the DA told local media that that just does not add up. She described the girl as petite, so the idea that a full-term child could be born, it was obvious that this girl was pregnant, according to authorities. Now, Dustin was 34 years old at the time of his arrest, and then Cherie Walker was 33. We found the Facebook pages for the Walkers. We found some pictures of them holding young children. Neighbors told local media in Tulsa that 6 children in all lived in that house. There were also multiple dogs and cats. Authorities have said that there was feces and urine inside the home. You just think of the lack of running water, the lack of air conditioning in Oklahoma in the summer. And neighbors also told local media that that was the condition of the home for years leading up to the uncovering of truly a house of horror. Now, here is how the investigation went down from our understanding. Police have an 11-year-old girl who has given birth to a baby. Then you have this baby, and then you have the horrible conditions in the house with all the other kids who are living there. And then you have the Walkers who are claiming they don't know how any of this could happen. Now, at first, both Cherie and Dustin were charged with 6 counts of neglect, and that was 1 for each child in the home. The baby then was tested for DNA, and that is when you have this sad and sick case that took an even worse step forward. The DNA reportedly showed
now the 99% certainty that Dustin Walker, the stepdad in his mid-30s, was the father, and a charge of sexual abuse of a child under the age of 12 was added to his case. Now Cherie Walker, the mom, she was charged with enabling sexual abuse. We have also learned, according to local media, that authorities say that Dustin Walker had a relationship with this child starting at the age of 10 years old. In the end, justice caught up with the accused. The courtroom's final verdict brought accountability, proving that the truth can prevail. What do you think about this case? Share your opinion in the comments and follow for more real crime stories.
But records show that the case was sent to collections. In 2023, he was charged with domestic assault and battery in the presence of a minor, and that case was dismissed. Now, clearly, the health and safety of the 11-year-old victim and the baby and the other children in the home in those conditions with the Walkers, it is so important to focus on. In the wake of their arrest, the DA said the 11-year-old victim was traumatized. That's probably the understatement of the century. This girl had given birth inside a home, reportedly without running water, without medical care. And on top of that, this girl had not seen this doctor in more than a year. She wasn't in school either. And you think that those would be places where someone could have intervened and helped, but she was kept out of sight. One of the people accused of aiding the abuse in this horrific situation wasn't just Cherie Walker. It was Cherie's mom, the victim's grandmother, and the newborn's great-grandmother. Her name is Michelle Justice. And on the day this story came to light, there was a reporter with the NBC station out of Tulsa, KJRH. They were in the neighborhood. They're trying to gather information for this story. And she reported that there was a woman who was taking videos of her from across the street. So she goes up to this woman and asks her what she knows about the neighborhood. And this is what the woman told her.
We didn't know this was happening. None of us.
How do you think your granddaughter got pregnant?
She keeps telling us that it was the little 12-year-old.
And the woman you saw there speaking was Michelle Justice. And this is her mugshot, according to law enforcement. And what she told the reporter, according to police, was a lie. Justice was arrested and charged with 6 counts of child neglect. It is believed a total, again, of 6 children lived in the home, including the 11-year-old. Justice is reportedly the 11-year-old's grandmother, and she also reportedly lived in the house where that child gave birth. She was accused of allegedly witnessing the birth. Now, at the time of this recording, Cherie Walker and Michelle Justice, they are still facing charges. In fact, they are slated to go on trial both next month, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But let's get back to Dustin Walker, because he entered a blind plea in March to the charges that he faced, meaning there was no plea deal in place, and he was entering pleas of guilty to every charge that he was facing and putting it on the court to decide what his punishment could be. Now, previously, the district attorney told media outlets that Dustin Walker could spend the rest of his life in prison. The charges that he pleaded guilty to also are considered 85% crimes in Oklahoma, meaning whatever his sentence was going to be, he would have to serve at least 85% of it. Walker's defense attorney told KJRH that it's not typical for him to advise a client to enter a blind plea, but in this situation, he, quote, didn't feel like there was one that we could get that would be useful or helpful in any way. And he described the potential punishment as, quote, wide open. So that brings us to what happened in Oklahoma in court this week. During Walker's sentencing, KJRH reports that prosecutors called 4 witnesses to the stand: the pediatrician who examined the 11-year-old girl, the DHS caseworker for the family, and a therapist for the 11-year-old girl. And there was a corrections officer who did a pre-sentencing investigation. Now, even though Walker had apologized, his attorney said his client was remorseful, the judge did not buy that because that judge gave Walker the most severe sentence, life in prison. Court records also show Walker received 15 years and 7 years on 2 child neglect charges, and he is going to have to serve these sentences consecutively, meaning he will serve the 15 and 7 before he even begins to serve his life sentence in Oklahoma State Prison. The district attorney said that the judge felt that Walker was not remorseful for what he did. Even she said that Walker blamed his wife and the 11-year-old for what happened. Now, this is one of 3 cases that are moving through the court system related to this nightmare. And you have Cherie Walker, who is the mother of that 11-year-old. She is slated to go on trial July 13th. And then her mom, Michelle Justice, the grandmother of the 11-year-old, is slated to go on trial July 23rd. Join us now to talk more about what is a really, really tough case. Courtney Kleiman, SVU and domestic violence prosecutor, thank you for taking the time to be with us here on Law and Crime. What do you make of the life sentence for Dustin Walker, plus the 7-year sentence he's going to get on one of the neglect charges, then a 15 on the other one?
Well, I think that takes into account the severity of the charges and the crime against the child. When a sentence is being determined, they look at how this impacts a child of such a young age. Also, sentencing is meant to hold people accountable, protect the community, and make sure that this does not happen again. So I think with that life sentence, it kind of goes without saying that that is preventing this from happening again, because he will be in prison for the rest of his life.
Yeah, and you think of, just the impact this will have on so many lives, multiple lives, all the children living in the home, and then, of course, the victim. This, I believe she's now 12, and then her newborn, which is just really, really tough to talk about. In a sentencing hearing like this, where he apparently spoke, cameras aren't allowed in Oklahoma in the courtroom, but, he apologized. His lawyer said that there was some remorse. But, I mean, when you look at what he pled guilty to, I mean, is there really anything in that moment in a blind plea that could actually impact what a judge is thinking going into a hearing like this?
So I would say 95% of the time, the judge has already made up their mind as to what they're going to sentence the defendant to prior to the defendant having a chance to speak at sentencing. In a case like this, the judge, I would say, ultimately had her mind up 99.9% by the time of sentencing. So I don't believe his small words of remorse would have any effect on what his sentence was going to be.
Yeah, because I feel like you've been part of them, I've covered them. You go into a sentencing hearing, and like even in some of them where there may be far more than just 4 witnesses and people talking, I always feel like it gets to this moment, and then a judge kind of looks over their notes over, maybe a minute or so, and then comes out with a statement. And you can see why in this case. I mean, you talk about the DNA, everything that's been laid out and how horrific it is. Words really cannot, I think, do anything that could undo what the damage that had been done. He went with a blind plea, Dustin Walker. And his attorney even told a local television station that as a defense attorney, you typically don't advise a client to do that, like kind of allowing the court to make this decision. But there just wasn't a lot more there, a lot more options that could come out of it. What is the expectation when a client comes in and gives this blind plea to the court, and how that works?
So essentially, a blind plea is when a defendant pleads to the entire indictment. So all of the charges that have been alleged to be against him, he pleads to all of it. So that takes away the power from the prosecution and the power from the defense. So there were no plea offers in this case. So when they give their discretion to the court for sentencing, that honestly shows how strong the prosecution's case is, because they're not making any offers. They have DNA in this case. It is almost a slam dunk shot for the prosecution. Can't say that with almost certainty, but it is a very strong case for the prosecution. That leaves the defense with very little options, either going to trial and risking something even more, or just pleading guilty and getting the sentence that is ultimately decided to the judge, and getting a chance to write to the judge as a defense attorney why they deserve some leniency.
And with that, because I don't know what conversations prosecutors and the defense attorney had over the last several months, but when you look at the DNA, it was 99.9% certainty that he was the father of this child. And that clearly is something, if you're a prosecutor, I would assume going into a case, you feel really strongly if this has to go to trial about how this is going to turn out. How does that typically work, though, in a prosecutor's office where you know the case is really strong, but maybe the defense calls and says, hey, we can have this go away right now? And in this situation, it seems like prosecutors were going to go forward to the point where there was really no other option but a blind plea for the defendant.
Right. So I think sometimes when prosecutors have a strong case like this, the reason why we would want it to go away or avoid a trial is to save the victim from having to testify about the most traumatic time in her life. That would be the only reason that we would ever consider a plea deal in a case that is strong like this, just to save the victim from having to testify in front of her abuser.
Yeah, and it's just it's so hard to comprehend. I mean, I remember just when this story first kind of came to be last year, like late summer, early fall, and it's like you read the headline and you're like, how is this possible? And you think about the condition that these children were in, where it's this home that doesn't have running water, it doesn't have air conditioning. So you're talking like Oklahoma, Tulsa, in like, August months. And then to think that this child had to give birth in that house, it's just terrible. When it comes to neglect cases, and, because the reality is in parts of the country, rural parts of the country, people may not have access to running water like many people assume is just kind of a regular part of life. And they may not have air conditioning either. But in this case, it seems very clear from every expert that's talked about it that this was neglect, very dangerous situations for these kids to be in. But typically looking at those cases, like what is typically the bar where it's like, okay, this is just someone, the way that they live, and it's their right to live a certain way. But when does it cross that line to the point when we're talking about neglect?
Sure. When talking about neglect, that's mostly family court. So their standard is much different than the criminal standard, which the criminal standard is beyond a reasonable doubt at a jury trial. On the family court side, the burden is much lower than that. But honestly, CPS and other agencies that assist families who are in difficult situations, it takes a lot to try and remove children from their families, even if there are signs of neglect, of hoarding, of no running water, especially in a state like Oklahoma. It does take a lot because, in family court, the whole point is family unification. They want to try and keep families together, and they would rather give resources than try and remove the kids right away, unless it's very severe, which in this case, it was very severe.
And this victim and the other children, like they did not go to school, according to police. She hadn't seen a doctor in more than a year, which is just so concerning considering the fact that she gave birth. But I also think of those being places where an adult could have had eyes on what was going on, and maybe this could have been brought to the attention of authorities sooner. In some of the cases, just kind of generally speaking, and I know each state is a little different when it comes to school requirements and all of that, but we do see cases where kids just haven't been in the school system and they're kind of out of sight for a lot of adults. Just like, how often do you see that play out where you just have children that just have not been in front of an adult who potentially could have done something to help?
All the time. Whether it's good suburbs or whether it's city school districts, that are poor, it really doesn't matter. It happens all the time.
And like with that, and I know you practice in the state of New York, because I think there are so many of these cases where we see, and it may not be specifically like this one. Like, what is the requirement typically for parents to like actually have their kids in school? Because I mean, there's just so many cases where you do see kids where they just haven't been out in public, and it's just you're so shocked that a situation could have escalated, like in this case, to the point where it's not until she goes to the hospital that police finally figure out that something was wrong.
So parents, it's actually in our Constitution. Parents actually have the right to choose where their child goes to education. So that could be homeschooling, where the only adult they're seeing is the person that's homeschooling, which is usually the parent.
Right.
That could be a public school. It could be a private school. It could be a charter school. So really, it's up to the parent to where that child goes to school, if they go to school, or they could be homeschooled. So the parents, that's why I was talking a lot about family court earlier. Parents really have a lot of power, and it takes a lot to remove their child because of the power that the parent has over their child.
Yeah, it's just tough because there are just so many of those times you're like, man, if someone just could have stepped in before it escalated, and I'm sure you see that on a daily basis with what you do for work. So Dustin Walker's wife, Cherie Walker, she's going to go on trial July 13th. And then her mom, Michelle Justice, is slated to go for a jury trial as well, July 23rd. As far as Cherie Walker, she is facing not only the neglect charges, but an aiding in the sexual abuse charge. How does the fact that Dustin Walker, which maybe it's not a surprise to her attorney that that's the direction that his case went, like how does the fact that his case is now set in stone impact potentially how her trial could play out?
So each defendant is charged with separate crimes, and the prosecution has to prove for each defendant beyond a reasonable doubt each element of the crime. That does not change. The fact that he pled guilty and admitted to what he did helps the prosecution in the jury trials of the others, because it admits some of those crimes admit that the others took place. Now, I don't know what the allocution actually said. If he named one of the others in admitting guilt, that helps the prosecution immensely. There also could have been an agreement. I don't know if this happened, but this happens a lot in these types of cases, that in an agreement for a lesser sentence, which I don't think happened here, that he would testify in their jury trial against them in order to get a lesser sentence to secure a conviction against the others.
And then just for this victim, and I'm sure I haven't seen, it hasn't been reported as of yet, just kind of where she's living and the situation, I believe. And then you have all these siblings that were there too. But like, I just think of a situation where she is so young and is someone who would need the care of adults still. But then also you have her child. Like, how does the system, and I don't know how many of these cases actually exist, but I'm sure, if there's someone who's maybe 16 and that might be more common that they may have a child, but like, how does the system handle that?
So CPS and other agencies are going to handle that. What I would think is that they would keep the mother and daughter together, and that they would place them either with a trusted family member, which I don't know in this case if there are any trusted family members, or placed in foster care.
Yeah. And it's just, it's a horrific case. I mean, I feel like I keep saying that, and it's just hard. Like when you read the headlines with it, all the details for it. Certainly a bit of justice in this case with Dustin Walker heading off to prison for the rest of his life. We'll see how the other trials play out. Courtney Kleiman, SVU and domestic violence prosecutor. Great to have you here on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. We are also streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.
In the end, justice caught up with the accused. The courtroom's final verdict brought accountability, proving that the truth can prevail. What do you think about this case? Share your opinion in the comments and follow for more real crime stories.